Hello there, thank you for joining me on Alyssa Jean's Reviews. My name is Alyssa, and this is my review for Netflix's Squid Game Season 1, the worldwide phenomenon that pretty much everyone is talking about. It is a South Korean show streaming in the United States, at least on Netflix. And the first section of this video will be spoiler free in case you are like among the 5 to 10 people on the planet who have not seen this yet. But for the rest of you, I will be going on to a spoiler section a little bit later where I will get into more spoilery analysis of my thoughts and reactions to this season. So as I said, it's a worldwide phenomenon. Everyone is talking about it, and everyone at my work was talking about it. Every single one of my coworkers was talking about what a great show this was. All the YouTube channels that I watch for MCU content had videos on this, which tells me they were into it, even though I didn't watch the videos because I knew they were spoilery. But everybody was talking about it, which quite honestly was a big turnoff for me. Anytime like everyone in the world is talking about something, I'm like, yeah, it's probably overrated. I had this same reaction in 2020 to Netflix's Tiger King, and I was resistant to watch it because of how apeshit everybody was going over it. And then, I started hearing more about the details of the Tiger King, and to me, quite frankly, it sounded like an overblown reality show. It's basically all it sounded like to me. And then I talked to some people who had seen it and was like, yeah, it's pretty much an overblown reality show. That's pretty much what it is. So I am proud to say I have never watched a single second of the Tiger King, and I never will as long as I live if I can help it. So I had that initial reaction to hearing everybody in the universe talk about Squid Game as well. However, when I heard about the premise of Squid Game, I was like, well, actually, that sounds kind of interesting. If it's done well, it could actually be pretty good. So I decided this time I actually would watch it, and I'm glad I did. Much to my surprise, it actually lives up to all the hype. It actually really is as good as everyone at my work was saying it was. Not to insult anybody at my work, but I just usually don't necessarily share the same opinions as them, or taste, I guess, in the type of shows that we watch. But this one absolutely blew me away, and I could not stop watching it. But actually, first, let me just talk about the premise in case you are one of those 5 to 10 people who don't know what the premise is. It's not a completely original premise. If you've seen The Hunger Games, Running Man, or any number of movies or TV episodes where a group of people are forced to participate in some sort of silly games with deadly consequences, where you're fighting to the death or some variation of that. In this case, the players are forced to play these children's games. Red light, green light is the game that they play in the first episode in order to win cash, but as I said, potential deadly consequences for playing these games. And that's all I can go into without being too spoilery. But that concept is not super unique, but the spin on this concept that this show takes is very unique. And I'll have to get into that more in the spoilery section, but it is not as simplified as a lot of films in this trope are. There's much more complex, there's much more to it. But again, that's something for the spoilery section. Now, as I was starting to say before, I could not stop watching this. When I first started watching it, I told myself I would watch the first 3 episodes and then just go to bed. But you know how Netflix, just goes right into the next episode unless you do something to stop it. After the third episode, I was like, well, I can't stop now. And then the fourth episode actually ends on a cliffhanger. So I was like, well, I can't go to bed now. There's a cliffhanger right here. So I ended up watching. I was so tired though, so I ended up falling asleep halfway through the fifth episode. Because I was supposed to go to bed after the third episode, but I could not stop watching it. And then I watched the rest of it all, and the next day, and then when I was done with it, I wanted more, and I could not stop thinking about it. It's one of those shows that like just sticks with you, and you just keep thinking about it, which I love. Now, this show is very intense at times. This is not some happy-go-lucky, feel-good show of the year by any crazy stretch of the imagination. It can be twisted and dark and intense, like super intense at times. But the social commentary that comes out of it is very unique and very powerful. That's what really, I think, resonated with me, is the way in which it was able to convey this social commentary that it has. It's just so powerful, but it's not happy. It is not a happy show. There are times when I was watching it and when I'm just like, that is so fucked up. But as I said, the social commentary that comes as a result of this is resonated with me and is very powerful. So definitely a show I would highly recommend if you're one of the 5 to 10 people on the planet who haven't seen it yet. Highly, highly recommended. It actually is, much to my surprise, living up to all of the hype that it has gotten. I'm actually surprised that it's so universally loved because of how kind of dark it can be. But it is worth the hype. You should watch it, and make sure that you change your Netflix settings so that you are getting the original Korean with the English subtitles. Because I started watching it accidentally with the, which is the default setting with the dubbing in English. And I watched Dark, and that way, Dark is a German show, and that was fine. They're Europeans. It's close enough to Americans, but I think to really appreciate where the culture that this is coming from, you need to hear the Korean language being spoken, and you need to hear the original actors' voices, because the voiceover actors is American dude. So you need to hear the Koreans talking, not some American dude trying to talk over the Koreans. So I would highly recommend that you make sure that you have your settings so that you're watching it in Korean with the English subtitles. Definitely do that. Anyways, go watch it if you have not already. Now I'm going to move over to the spoiler section where I can get into a more deeper analysis of some of the things that really struck me about this show. Okay, so now let's get into the spoiler section. So if you are one of those 5 to 10 people who haven't seen it yet, please leave now, because I'm going to reveal the ending pretty soon into this. Like, I'm going to just casually talk about what happens at the very end, and you don't want to be spoiled, so please leave now. So, for those of you who have seen it, I'm just going to kind of talk about the aspects of this show that really resonate with me, that really stood out to me. I could spend 2 hours talking about each character and what their story means, and all the little Easter eggs, all the little visuals. Like, the visuals were stunning, by the way. Just the pastel colored stairs, MC Escher stairs, and it was part of what captivated me, and it also fit into the tone really, really well, and fed into the social commentary. So actually what I want to start talking about, though, is what I alluded to in the spoiler-free section, about the spin that the show puts on a common trope of this deadly game, the Hunger Games, blah, 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 etc., etc. And then that's going to tie into the social commentary, so I'll end up talking about the social commentary. But so the spin that they put on, the Hunger Games, Running Man, whatever, Gamesters of Triskelion, that trope is that technically, these people are not forced to be there. They're not prisoners. They're not captives. They weren't forced to be there by their government, who forced everybody to participate in a lottery, and whoever selected in the lottery has to participate in the Hunger Games. It is nothing like that. They have free will. They could decide as a group that they don't want to be there, and they can leave. They can walk right on out of there, and they do not have to participate. And indeed, that is what happens in episode 2. However, what makes this even more interesting and a little bit more complicated is that free will that I just talked about, that choice that they have, is just an illusion. For all intents and purposes, they're as very much a prisoner as Katniss is in the Hunger Games. They really actually don't have a choice because of their economic status, because of their financial status, because of their class status. Now, to be fair, some of that is of their own making. You look at our main character, Ji-hun. He is certainly a gambling addict. Suwon is some kind of a crook. I wasn't exactly sure what his deal was, but he's not a good dude. So his circumstance in some ways was of his own making as well. However, all of that originates in their economic status. They wouldn't be in the position to have to be a gambling addict or to be a crook if not for their economic status. And so it shows to me just the incredible gap and disconnect between the wealthiest of the wealthy and just the ordinary working class struggling person, because the ordinary struggling person, especially when they do get themselves in a lot of debt, as a lot of these characters do, are desperate for money. They would do anything to win a large sum of money like that. And this is, I don't know how won translates into dollars, but there was some ridiculous amount of money. So episode 2 was really, really interesting to me when you see each of the characters go back into their crappy lives. And we had seen Ji-hun in the first episode, but we hadn't really seen the other characters' crappy lives. So we kind of see what they're dealing with and why risking their lives for all of that money is more appealing to them than their crappy lives. And the other thing that was interesting to me is they quite intentionally set it up so that the old man, who is the leader of it all, the creator of everything, was the last vote when they were doing that vote, because they went from 456 in reverse order, knowing that their leader is at number 1, so that if it was a tie, he could decide. And he actually chose to let everybody go. And I think he did that because he knew the appeal of the game. He thought the appeal of the game was so strong that they would be back. I really do not think he truly understood what it was to be struggling. He was portrayed at the end as a very, very wealthy man. I don't think he had any idea of what it was like to be so desperate for money that you would be willing to sacrifice your life if you just have the chance of getting out of debt. He has no concept of what that's like. To him, it is all just a game. The dude was cracking up hysterically during the red light, green light game. He has no concept what it is like for them, for those others. He has no empathy for them and no idea. And I think that was a very consistent message throughout. And we get these American wealthy people who I read as the 1% of the 1%. Kind of reminded me of the dudes in Mr. Robot. You wouldn't have been surprised if White Rose walked in the door there. That's when they kind of reminded me, crossover with Mr. Robot. No, but it reminded me of that, like just the wealthiest of the wealthy. And they're called the VIPs here. And the scene where the VIPs are, or a couple scenes where they're sitting there and like drinking probably glasses of scotch that cost $1 million and gambling on people's lives. I wish I could say that was an analogy for how things are in our society, but I think it's kind of pretty much literal. I mean, not quite literal. We're not actually, playing in those games specifically, but the idea that they're sitting around betting on how many people are going to die of COVID, while they're, the billionaires got richer during the COVID crisis where everyone else suffered. The idea that they would be sitting there betting on it, to me, is not far-fetched. So I kind of think this is not too far off from the literal, but it's also an analogy and a very powerful one, and one that really resonated with me. And it's a very hard one to swallow, but I don't know, it's kind of easier to swallow in fiction than it is in watching the news. But I thought it was a very powerful message, just showing the wealth gap and just how out of touch and disconnected the wealthy are from just regular struggling people. So that aspect of it really, really stuck with me. Now, I want to touch a little bit on what I talked about in the spoiler-free section about how intense this is and how powerful it is. And I've got to talk about episode 6 because that episode had me freaking in tears. So that is the episode where they play marbles, and it's one of the things that I was like, God, that is so fucked up, because they are playing such fucked up mind games with these people, and I'm surprised nobody really ever caught on. Like, they were all taking it seriously. Oh, well, I wonder what kind of game we're going to play now. Like, they didn't think about... Nobody was like, well, they've been really fucking with us, so let me try to think about how they're going to fuck with us now. Like, nobody was thinking that way, but they were fucking with them. And in that marble game, they intentionally used the word team. You must choose teams of 2. And so naturally, everyone thought exactly what they wanted them to think, which is that the person that they would choose would be their teammate and they would work together. So they made it intentionally so everybody would choose the person they liked the most, so they would be forced to have to kill them. That is so fucked up. But it made for some really intense scenes. So the scene with the 2 women, even though the one of them we'd only really met briefly in a previous episode, but that, I think that's where I cried the most, where the one girl was just like, you have something to live for, I don't, I just got out of prison, so I have nothing to live for. It was so sad. And then poor Ali, like, oh, poor guy. Like, I think he was a one genuinely good guy. Like, I don't think... I mean, I think he was just in bad circumstances. I don't necessarily think that he was necessarily the creator of his own demise like some of the others were, or his own situation. I think he's a good guy trying to provide for his family, and I felt so bad for him because Soo-won is such a fucking bastard. And we knew he was a bastard early on, at least as early as the Honeycomb game, if not before, whereas Ji-hun thought he was, this great and wonderful person from his childhood. Of course, he figured out later that wasn't true, but Soo-won's such a fucking bastard. Oh my god. So that was heartbreaking when he told him, oh yeah, go around and count all the elderly people and the young people, and you knew. I was like, Ali, how are you so dumb? Like, don't fall for that. But he trusted Soo-won implicitly, and so that was heartbreaking. Now, there's the scene between Ji-hun and the old man, and you might say, well, that's not sad now that you know what the ending is, that this is really the guy who was behind it all, and he's not actually dead. And by the way, in case you're wondering how he's still alive, we don't actually see him get shot on screen. If you watch it again, we see Ji-hun walking away. We hear a gunshot in the background, and that gun was probably shot in the air. So we never actually saw him being killed. But anyways, you could say, well, after we know the ending, that's not so sad. But the thing is, the old man dying wasn't the sad part to me. We already knew he was going to die. That was stated in the beginning of the series. There was 0% chance he was getting out of the series alive. The sad part to me was that Ji-hun had lost a piece of his soul. He had lost a piece of his humanity because he was put in this situation where he either could die or he had to deceive an old man with dementia and then have the old man die, which of course didn't end up being the case. But the important part of that is he believed it to be the case. So he believed he was deceiving a poor old man with dementia to cause his death. And I think that that is the moment where Ji-hun was never the same again. I don't think he's ever the same person again. I think that's why you see him in the state that you do at the end of the series. I think that's when he lost a piece of his soul. That's when he lost a bit of his humanity. And I think we're going to see a very different Ji-hun in season 2, which I assume there's going to be. I think this game changed him for the rest of his life, and not in a positive way. He lost his humanity and left it here on that island. And that was the moment where it happened. So regardless of who the old man really is and whether he really died, that is still true. So that does not change. That is still very, very, very powerful. Oh, I could go on and on about this show. But I do want to talk about the ending, and then I'll wrap this up, because while the one twist that the front man was the brother of the cop, that was like, I could see that from a gazillion miles away. That was the most obvious thing I've ever seen in my life. So that didn't blow me away. The twist of who was behind the games actually did surprise me, but it's funny, like, I thought about it when I very, very first saw him in the first episode, and he was like number 1. I was like, I bet this is the guy behind the whole thing. And then it's kind of weird, I just sort of forgot about that. Like, I forgot that I had thought that, because I just got so invested in this character and his relationship with Ji-hun and his involvement in the games, that I just even forgot that I was thinking about him being behind the whole thing. So I actually was a bit surprised when he was. And the scene when Ji-hun is with him in his dying bed, and they're playing one last game to bet on the homeless person's life, which just shows you how little he values human life, and he still wants to play games and bet on them, and how Ji-hun is just so he's affected forever by this whole thing. That whole scene was incredible. That was so powerful, that scene in the final episode. The show is so good. I just kept thinking about it after it was done. And also, as I mentioned before, the visuals just really take the cake. It's just unbelievable. So anyways, I think I want to go ahead and wrap up this review now, and I'll go ahead and give you my rating out of 10 for this show. Okay, so here is my rating. As I do with every show, I will give a rating out of 10, with 1 being the lowest possible score and 10 being the highest possible score. My rating for Squid Game Season 1 is a 10, a show that actually lived up to the hype, a show that will stick with me long after I finish watching it, that I will probably watch again at some point whenever I have the time. And right now, at this point in the year, we're almost 3/4 way through the year, and I got this at number 1 of 2021 at this point, but we've got the rest of October, November, and December. Actually, I guess we're past the 3/4 mark of the year, now that I think about it. My math is off. But in any event, we got a couple more months for another show to surpass it. But right now, this tops any of the MCU stuff, or any of the Star Wars stuff, or anything else that I've seen this year. I I'm impressed. I didn't think I would be as impressed as I was, but what an amazing show. So, that is my review for Squid Game Season 1. Please check out all of my other content on my channel related to Star Trek, the MCU, Star Wars, and I talk about my transition and trans-related issues as well. So check out all of that stuff, and I will see you soon.